Okay, so we've got a little primer on it. The primer also acts as like a, it's well, what is it? It's this stuff here, surface primer. That stuff right there. So, got it all primered. I took off the landing gear parts and got the primer onto those, sanded them up a little bit, try and see how they'll look with paint. And I keep noticing, and I saw it, and I thought, it's a problem situation. And I think I want to deal with it. Remember our plug here to keep this tail section from compressing while sanding, while prepping. Anyway, I'm sticking it back in here, but if you look, you can see we've got a distinctly a proper continuation radius here to the tail, and this one might be a little improper. There's a bit of a kick right there, and then our block relatively is relatively making a straight shot to the tail here. So this one is bowed and conforming nicely to the overall shape, and this one is not playing well with the others. So I was thinking about at this point maybe addressing that. I could let it go. It's not a huge deal, and obviously I've got a little bit more filling to do. One of the things the primer will showcase is areas that you might still need to do a little bit of finesse work, finesse. Anyway, and it also really kind of highlighted this area, so I took the liberty of cutting a little wedge of off of this. You wetted it and gave it a little radius to help it conform to this issue. I can fair this in and use filler to make it smooth, and then we can add a small piece of tail block. This isn't necessarily it, but it was something like this. Just a small section of that, add it on and fair it up and bring that line out even with this. My initial plan was I faired this all the way out, and then I can cut it back to this line for the rudder, which will attach here vertically, or I can build it out, build this area out as I'm repairing this small defect, and then I can lengthen the tail just a bit or just set it back, but I'd probably just lengthen it on these two areas, make a longer root anchor piece here, and then make a slightly longer upright, and then just shape the rest of it to the plan. I'm going to be making templates for those anyway, and just making them, cutting them from solid 1/16 balsa plywood, rather than laying them up like this. I don't use any kind of skinning other than I just use balsa. So I thought I can just draw that up, make it a little larger on the drawing, and just cut it out. And the way we're going to do the balsa wood is, if I just laid in an 1/8 inch thick sheet of balsa here with the grain running either way, it'll eventually warp. Whichever way that grain is traversing, you get warp. If I had a small piece, I could show you. Yeah, something like this. Okay, so if I just use one piece of wood, we got the grain running this way, and what would happen? Let me see if I'm not startling everyone. All right, I can do this. If I just put it in this way here, it's going to tend to warp like that. And the same if I go this way, the tail section that I put in there is going to warp upward or downward depending on moisture content and so on, which side is more porous. So what you do to prevent that is, if I want a net 1/8 inch thickness here to fill this, I want 1/8 of an inch at least, and then I'll use filler. So I would use two sheets that are 16 thick. This is obviously not 16, but let's imagine that it is. This is 16th. So what you do is you come in and you cross the grain, right? So one side will have the grain running that way, and the other side piece will have the grain running this way, right? So you just you glue those two pieces up, and you can either do it, you know, before you cut out the pattern, or you can cut out the pattern on each piece that's 1/16, just making sure you cut one way and cut the other one the other way, and then lay those together, lay them up together, and that prevents that warping and flexing and bending and all that stuff. So instead of this way, and wherever you have that grain crossed, there's just no way it can warp. That problem is solved. So so I'm thinking now I could do that. I could just make the vertical tail a little bit longer than the plan, and maybe just come up maybe an eighth or a quarter of inch, make the tail a quarter of inch taller. I've looked at the plan differential between the C3B and the Cloudboy, and the Cloudboy does have a slightly larger tail, but it's an overall effect. It's I would just be changing it to make it fit this airframe. So a good drawing of that, but I'd be making it longer along the top here and making this section longer, and then just So I guess I'd be making it larger overall. All right, so I'm still thinking about, I'm still pondering this. If I do it, we'll slip our lock back in there. There it is. Slip the plug back in. Rest this piece on there so I can see what I'm doing. Trace the cut line on it. Cut this extra piece off. I don't want that huge flange up there. I'm going to be sanding and filling, so I would glue this on here. The cut piece already sliced off there, and then we would just lay on the filler. So we'd put this on here nice and tight, and just lay filler all across this, basically reshaping this half of the triangle, this hemisphere over here on this side, leaving that alone. Just making sure we come in nice and even across the top, and then fair this out so that we have that same radius on this side that we have on that side. I don't know if you can kind of see by looking at that if this is sanded, rounded, and flushed up with the rest of the tail cone, we might end up with a better look. I'm thinking it's worth the effort, and I rarely think that any of this is worth the effort when it comes to major, like this is to me major surgery, or at least a major cosmetic surgery, let's call it. So let's see if I use this piece instead of that one. It's a little bit lower. Means more filler will have to be used on the top. And then if I use the other one, which grows narrower toward the end, or if I slice off another chunk of maybe a 1/16 square, an 1/8 inch square strip stock along the top edge there, and then use filler, and then sand the bejesus out of it. Yeah, I'm thinking about this. Let me think about that. But anyway, something comes up every once in a while. Every build you're doing, nothing's perfect, and the pursuit of trying to get it as good as you can make it is one thing. We tend to have this discussion a lot among modelers is how far do you go, and where do you draw the line between what you're willing to accept and what you aren't willing to accept? It's a funny thing on the psychology side, I guess, of the hobby is some people they'll tear down a month's worth of work over something that just doesn't agree either with their eye or with the plan or with, you know, something that they may learn after the fact about the piece they're working on, the about the, you know, the real life version of what they're working on, and say, wow, I can't have it, you know. But everybody's different, and yet then we all kind of you know, struggle with that, where, and it's a life lesson too, like, you know, how much can you take, what are you willing to put up with, you know, what are you going to fight for versus when are you going to relax and just let things be. And you know, there's so much culture tied up in the way we make decisions. And our culture, you know, is, well, we don't have to make commentary. It's just, you know, everybody's different, and everybody's willing to accept a different, you know, to different levels of, you could put it on a spectrum if you like. Everybody likes talking about the spectrum of this or that in psychology. But you know, I'm looking for something, you know, clean overall, and you know, acceptable in my view. This is my exercise after all. You know, the appreciation of the end product is, you know, it's not it's not contingent on me, you know, living or dying at all, or even anything close to that. So this is just you know, something I like to do, and if it's something you like to do, and you're going to lose sleep over it, you know, you want to be able to pick your battles on that. So anyway, this is a small you know, I would call it a situation, and I don't like those, but it's not a major thing, and it is something I could deal with. And I am procrastinating on beginning work on these wings, and the reason for that is, if you can look at this plan, you'll see I have half of a lower wing, the left half and center section here, and I have the right half of the upper wing, and that's all I've got. And so I'm going to have to trace each of these and then flip it over, you know, in order to build each half that is missing. I'll have to do this other operation, which is, you know, I mean, okay, so that's what you got to do. I am unused to doing that, but it's not a problem. And it's got me procrastinating on this now. So, you know, stay tuned to see what I do. I don't know. I'm still thinking what I'll do. You know, if I decide to fill this in and correct this thing, which it does draw the eye, and that's, to me, that's the thing. I don't want any, you know, most of the stuff somebody wouldn't think twice about. Somebody who is really familiar with airplanes, maybe, but somebody who's just you know, just appreciating the a model of an airplane isn't necessarily going to be up in arms over something like that. But this draws the eye in a way that I try to avoid. So I think I'm going to do this. I think I'll use this piece this way, because that's just the kind of guy I am, right? And who cares one way or the other in the whole grand configuration of things? Doesn't really matter. I might do this. No, I'm thinking.